Good morning, everyone. Looks like we are live now at this Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos, or AEM event. We're really happy to be here. Thanks everyone to be here. We have today a very international panel with these really interesting topics, and now it gets more relevance with the entrance in force of the new USMCA in English, or TEMEC in Español. As you will see later, our panelists are top-level advisors for companies that do business internationally. But first, before we start, I really want to thank our Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos sponsors. First to IBC Bank, our national sponsor or regional sponsor for AEM USA. Thank you very much, IBC. And our other USA sponsors, Houston EB5 and Delta Aeromexico. Also want to thank our silver sponsors for the San Antonio chapter, the City of San Antonio. Our bronze sponsors, Marathon Bank, New York Life, the North American Development Bank, Vantage Bank, and Frost Bank. Our partners in the San Antonio chapter, the Teletón USA, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce, Urban Future Lab, Launch USA, and the San Antonio Economic Development Foundation. And of course, our corporate chapter sponsors, Port of San Antonio, Sol Schwartz and Associates, Cascio Cavazos and Newton, SWBC, TD Tedisa, and Alpha Media. I really want to thank all for your support for the association. Without the support of our sponsors and members, the chapter just could not exist and the association could not exist. Thanks everyone, and thank you for joining us in this series of webinars that we are launching since the pandemic started. Well, I also want to remind you to visit us on our website. You can see all of our events nationally in the USA and Mexico. And if you are not a member, I strongly suggest you to become a member today. You will have, we can discuss the benefits of being a member and what all you get when joining the association. And also like us on social media. You can find us everywhere at AEM San Antonio, in all the social media, in LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Well, today we're going to talk about investigations at the border, the main concerns about USA and Mexico. And as I mentioned before, we have a very international panel. We have Eduardo Vargas. Eduardo is the Ethics and Compliance Director of Constellation Brands. Constellation Brands is a company based, Eduardo, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the headquarters are in Chicago. But all the productions, all the beer production of the brand happens in Mexico. And Eduardo is in Mexico City. He's an attorney in Mexico with a very strong background in compliance, ethics, and privacy law. He also had a diploma in anti-corruption compliance from the International Anti-Corruption Academy. So Eduardo, thank you for being here, and we really look forward to listen what you have to prepare for us. We also have the presence. I'm very honored to present Brian Oblens. Brian is, we discussed this before, but he's an attorney in the US. He's an authorized attorney in the US and in England. So again, very international. Dentons, it's a very global law firm, one of the major law firms in the world. And Brian's practice on the Kansas City office, and his main practice is risk mitigation for global companies. And we also have the presence of Diego Campa. Diego is also a partner in Dentons in Mexico City. Diego handles matters of energy, infrastructure, anti-corruption, and corporate compliance, dispute resolution, and government procurements. Thank you, Brian and Diego, for sharing the forum with us. We're really honored to have you here. And last but not least, we have Fernando Ceballos Mesa. Fernando is the founder and CEO of F&C Consulting Group. F&C Consulting Group has offices in Mexico City, in Texas, in Ecuador, in Colombia, and presence in other Latin America countries. Fernando is an expert in doing business in emerging markets, in forensics investigations, compliance, anti-bribery, and management systems. Fernando is originally from Ecuador, but soon to be a Mexican, an adopted Mexican. I think he has 3 Mexican kids, so he can consider himself now a Mexican. And David Kibilevic, he's originally from Venezuela, but also with a long time living in Mexico City. David, it's a partner of F&C Consulting Group with experience in information technology and service industries. Well, these are our panelists today. I would like to start our discussion today with Eduardo. Eduardo Vargas, if you can tell us your or explain us a little bit. Your company, Constellation Brands, is not a secret, has been struggling with some issues at the border. The Mexican government have announced that they will not grant or suspend the necessary permits for a plant in Mexicali, jeopardizing an investment of $1.4 billion. Could you please explain to the empresarios and to the assistants of these forums the main challenges that your company have faced during these investments in Mexico and with these international transactions?
Thank you very much, Javier. Thank you for the introduction, and happy to be here as part of this great panel. And that question is very relevant for, I think, U.S.-Mexico border transactions. As you correctly mentioned, Constellation Brands is a U.S.-based company. Beer operations is the widest and largest portion of the business right now for Constellation Brands. It represents more than 70% of the revenue of the company. The other side of the revenue comes from wine and spirits, but right now the beer division is the strongest business within Constellation Brands. As you correctly noted, our beer division is mainly based in Chicago, but the whole company is headquartered in New York. So it's a full US-based company with a strong investment in Mexico. There's a huge business here. So the challenges, I think, that they are huge. The company acquired 2 separate breweries. One is in Piedras Negras, Coahuila, and the other is in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora. And these previously were owned by Grupo Modelo, and when the divestiture and all the selling was detonated, these 2 facilities came to Constellation Brands. So the Constellation Brands acquired the operation already ongoing. But then, given the size of, for example, California, Arizona, Nevada, Washington State in the north, there's a huge demand for beer. And California alone is a huge economy. So it made sense for the company to have an investment in Mexicali in the border. One of the main issues there was kind of scarcity of water, but there were studies issued by Mexican government that showed that water is a commodity there that is sufficient both for agricultural purposes and for industrial purposes, in this case for beer. And the only thing that happened is that within the struggle of the business was mixed with political struggle. Elections came, and there was opposition for a brewery to get into Mexicali, given all this perception of water scarcity, and that there was a lot of struggle in that sense. And when our current federal government came into office, uh, there was kind of a plebiscite to determine if the people in Mexicali would like Constellation Brands to be there, and apparently they all the organization was not according to law, because all those plebiscites should be um, organized by the Federal Elections Institute or the Local Elections Institute in that case. So it was, in my terms, and this is my perspective, it was kind of a mess. That a business decision that was already in place, permits were already there, became entangled with political decisions. So the result and the main challenge is how that does can business have this kind of certainty and assurance that the rule of law would prevail, and that any business decision would be protected by the law if it's a sound business decision, if it is lawful, if it is ethical business, that should be protected and not subject to anybody else's opinion, and that decision should follow a course of action that might be transparency, and any legal and ethical standards should be there in place for everybody to see. But I don't think in that way, and the way that was politically handled. And so the main challenges that empresarios might face in the border in that side is to cope with political decisions that might affect the business. And on the other side, there's if there's a business plan to invest in Mexico, the other recommendation, and it's also a challenge, is to have compliance involved since the beginning, so that the compliance function can walk along with external affairs, corporate affairs, legal department within the company, and make sure the investments run as smooth as possible.
Thank you, Eduardo. Really, really interesting what is happening now, and we really hope that everything turns out on the best way for everybody on this situation. Brian, you handle a lot of US clients. Could you let us know which is the main concern that your US clients ask you when they decide to do business in Mexico or at the border? How to prevent risk, and or what do you tell them? What's your main advice that you give to them?
Thanks, Javier. It's great to be here. Yeah, it's a great question. That the question comes up around really any border crossing, right? When companies decide we're going to do business outside of our country, we're going to cross a country border, and we're going to sell or whatever, right? We're going to hire a distributor. We're going to do business across the border. A lot of the same concerns come up. There are some specific ones around the Mexico-U.S. border that come up, and they mainly honestly stem from political decisions. There's seems to always be some sort of ongoing dispute. It doesn't really matter how far back we look. Sometimes it's agricultural, sometimes it's related to people crossing the border, sometimes it's agriculture products, sometimes it's food products, sometimes it's animals. So if we look back, we see some concerns that I think are driven by politics. But the problem is that those politics create a regulatory issue. I mean, that's how they're enforced. And then anytime there's a regulatory hurdle, you have to comply with the regulatory aspect, but then it creates a risk that what I see as the main concern is corruption. So meeting regulatory burdens in an appropriate way makes total sense. The problem is there are entrepreneurs out there who are in charge of enforcing some regulatory hurdle, and then there are entrepreneurial folks who have to get something done, and sometimes, you know, that ends in some private deal, and it's corrupt, and so that creates problems for companies that are crossing the border. And then the sort of non enforcement risk. So that's my concept from the U.S. government enforcing, but fraud is always an issue, right? And so that can be, you know, people inside the company stealing, using some mechanism to steal. It could be people taking advantage of the company, people outside the company. So that's the other big risk. And then the rest of the bundle, you know, the U.S. is pretty aggressive about enforcing laws around, you know, the U.S. government sees people you should do business with and people you shouldn't do business with, and they sanction different parties. And that includes, for example, things like money laundering, right? In the U.S., enforcement of money laundering has come down to, we don't want you using the financial system to support, you know, folks that the U.S. government has declared as off limits. And so those are really the three biggest areas: corruption, sanctions, which I say that in the big picture, not just the particular sanctions laws and lists of sanctions parties, and then fraud. And just a word on what the corruption risk is. You know, I try to see things in its simplest terms. You know, the U.S. law, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, can be very complex, and you know, every one of the words, the lawyers fight about what each word is in the statute and what each word means. But in general, the law prohibits giving anything of value, either directly or indirectly, to a government official in order to get that government official, you know, to change his conduct or, you know, omit something, just to take advantage of, to gain an advantage by paying money or anything else of value to a government official in order to gain some improper advantage. And so in the U.S., that law is that statute is a criminal statute. And so what that means is there has to be intent along with it. And so very often when we're talking about you know, companies paying money in order to get something done, it has to be done corruptly, right? That's the intent. It has to be done corruptly. And so, but all that means is I intend to gain some advantage that's improper, some advantage I shouldn't have by paying some official some money or, you know, lavish trip or something else of value. So I could go on for a long time about what you know, what the law is around that, and this may come up again in questions or as we go forward with the presentation, but that's generally what it stands for. And there are a lot of cases that have been enforced by the U.S. government over time that involve U.S. parties doing business in Mexico and getting in trouble in various ways. Customs is what very often happens. You know, there will be a customs agent who wants to take money, and then there's somebody who needs to get something through customs, and you'll end up paying. The more common way that companies get into trouble is by hiring a third party and sort of turning their back on the process, right? And the third party engages in some conduct that they don't report back. They pay a bribe, basically. And, you know, the companies aren't paying enough attention to who they're hiring or what that agent is doing, and that agent gets the company in trouble. So to prevent those risks, to detect those risks, to remediate those risks, a strong compliance program is obviously really important. And And you'll, I'm sure all of us will be back to that topic as we speak. From my perspective, it means, look, you've got to know the people you're doing business with, and you've got to do some work to figure out who they are. And if problems come up in that process, red flags, you have to deal with them. You can't you can't just ignore it. Oh, I didn't want to hear that news. You have to see the problem and you have to deal with the problem. If you get some bad feedback about some agent that you want to hire, and it turns out that you still want to hire that agent, you have to evaluate the problems that come up. It doesn't mean that you can't use somebody, but you certainly have to evaluate it, and then you have to protect yourself as a company. So all that is part of a strong compliance program. And I know that folks have heard this refrain, but the compliance program has to meet the risks that the business face. And so if your risk is, I'm crossing the border and I'm concerned about an agent I might hire who might help us with customs, the company needs to have in its compliance program something to deal with that risk. So those are the biggest concerns, and I think those are the main remedies that you see.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Really interesting, and to take in consideration for. And Diego, I would like to ask you, and in relation of something that just Brian said about the rule of law, and also Eduardo mentioned the rule of law and compliance involved. Diego, you as a Mexican attorney, could you explain us how the regulatory and legal structure from the Mexican side is what the empresarios or the US businessmen that want to do business in Mexico, they should take in consideration, mostly when they are dealing or doing business at the border?
Sure. Thank you, Javier, and thank you all for inviting me to this wonderful webinar. Well, yes, I think a first point that both Mexican and US and Canadian companies, for that matter, should be aware of in doing business in the border is that under Mexican law, generally speaking, or pretty much all of the time, the importer of record is required to retain a customs agent to undertake whatever import is necessary to do the business. So it is important to determine how these customs agents are approved or licensed by the government, and how the companies are actually required to retain them. Okay, so first, under the customs law, any physical individual or any person is allowed to apply for a customs license, what is called a patente aduanal. But this is a physical person. It's important that you understand that this is a physical person that is not a company who is actually granted the customs license. So once this customs license is granted, it's a monopoly, or sort of a monopoly to undertake this service on behalf of importers of record. So whenever a US or a Mexican company is looking to retain a customs agent, it is very important that they actually do a due diligence on the person or the persons working at the whatever office you're using at any border. There are customs agents assigned to different borders, so you could have a customs agent assigned to the Laredo border, and they are also allowed to work other borders, but not necessarily. I think there is a limit on 3 borders maximum that they can work on. So the first point is that the clients or the company should understand that they will be retaining physical persons. Second, what does the customs agent actually do on behalf of the company or the client? They take care of all the paperwork, submit invoices, pedimentos aduanales, etc., to the customs authority. And they often also obtain whatever authorizations. They help with inspections at the border. For example, if you have a cargo coming into Mexico and the cargo is required to be inspected by whatever government agency, Usually, these agents also take care of helping the client with the process of that inspection or supervision by the Mexican government. Where is the risk in all of this? Generally speaking, customs agents they have certain ways of dealing with customs authorities and other government agents at the border, whereas they pay what could be considered under U.S. law as facilitation payments, or other type of arrangements that would not be acceptable on both under Mexican law and under U.S. law. Of course, clients often argue that they were not aware of this, but that usually is that's not enough for the Mexican standard or for the U.S. standard. They have to be aware of what these customs agents are doing on their behalf, because they could be held liable for whatever the customs agents are doing at the border, because at the end of the day, those services are not being rendered for the benefit of the customs agent. They're being rendered for the benefit of the company to conclude a business. So understanding the Mexican regulation at the border, which can be very complex and vary significantly depending on the industry. You have the fuels industry coming, importing gasoline. You have the food industry. You have the auto industry. So, and each industry is heavily regulated separately, so to speak. And it's very important that the companies and clients fully understand what the regulation requires to undertake an import, so that they can manage and control their agents, such as a customs agent, with respect to all the authorizations and licenses that are required. That's pretty much in a nutshell the issue, but of course it's much more complex. But in a nutshell, that would be the main concern or the biggest risk on the Mexican side.
Thank you, Diego.
Javier.
Yes.
Just a couple of comments, just trying to add up to the conversation that Brian started and Diego. In my experience, I have detected a couple of third-party red flags that are common in Mexico. And I think that empresarios should be very aware of these red flags. The first one is when anybody says, I know a guy that gets the job done, it's expensive, but it's effective. So that's a red flag. You should look into that vendor, into that third party, and provide due diligence and perform due diligence very thoroughly. And the second one is, I don't care how you get it done. Just get the job done. I don't want to know how. That is kind of frequent in internal areas within companies, and that's a kind of an avenue that poses a certain amount of risk of corruption. So with these two red flags and any other forms and shapes that these two red flags can take, you can be aware of any potential corruption risks.
Yeah, this is Brian. Can I comment on that? Follow up on that? Javier?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Okay, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, so just defensively for a company. Well, let me start with this comment. I think companies often say to themselves, hey, look, on the other side of the fence, they are making money. There's so much opportunity. And so, you have a business development person or you have a salesperson in the organization, and they say, hey, I talked to my friend, and if we are able to export to whatever country, the returns are, 5% higher than here in the US, we should go. The problem is that a lot of times they don't take into account that there's also risk, and that 5% may get eaten up by 10% of the cost of compliance or regulatory issues. But certainly the risk is higher, and people sometimes forget to include that. So that's that's kind of the mindset of going into a new market. And if we were talking about the point that Diego was making about, okay, you're going to hire a person. That person is going to engage in some customs activity for you, whether it's interacting with customs agents on behalf of the company, or trying to expedite your load, trying to get your products to the front of the queue. Maybe they pay a facilitation payment. Whatever they do on your behalf, one of the defensive things the company can do, and this costs money because you have to hire someone or train someone who's in the organization, is look, you've got to review the information you get back. You're going to get an invoice. There needs to be backup. I mean, it's a very practical issue. Someone should talk to the customs agent. You know, it's not really just a hey, what's your name and address, and send us an invoice. We've got, you know, we know you can get it done. You've got to interact with your agents and then try to figure out what they're doing. If they have a bunch of line items that don't make any sense and don't have any backup, ask some questions. It's a place that a company can get into trouble, but it's also a place, an opportunity to defend the company and take care of the employees. You know, like let's create some compliance.
Experience, right? We did an investigation a couple of months ago where in the border, especially, you know, cities in the border are not well developed, and you cross the border is a different scenario, right? And unfortunately there is a line, imaginary line or a wall that there's the behavior changes. But let's talk about from this side of the world, this part of the border, which is Mexico. Where we have identify and discover that there's a very thin line between what is fraud, what is compliance issues, and what are criminal organized crime involved. Okay, and this investigation that we just recently did is that there was an allegation about potential kickbacks from a procurement guy to a specific vendor. That specific vendor, okay, when we started doing the investigations, all the forensic technology, which Dave is going to talk about, and all the accounting interviews, working with law firms, like you, Brian, have been working extensively, is basically we identified that this vendor was related to a particular organized crime. And that particular connection to that organized crime has also links to potential government officials as well. So now you are navigating within a large amount of risk, a huge amount of risks, where you look at this angle from a fraud, theft perspective, from kickbacks, and which impacts financially, of course. You look at this from a compliance white collar perspective, because you are using this vehicle X vendor that you are potentially benefiting from a government official, and in terms of licenses, permits, and so on. And also, are you potentially violating or having some money laundering issues around it, where it could be also linked to it. The main thing here is to think about what are my main concerns in terms of when I get an allegation from the hotline or from anywhere and you start to investigate. You have to draw a line and make sure that whether you want to start identifying potential kickbacks and potential fraud, it may end up incurring into a compliance issue. Custom agents is pretty common. All the guys that are granting the issue that is suffering right now, Eduardo, licensing and permit is also. However, having this third party that usually is your vendor and usually is the vendor that is key for your business and operation. Most of the business that are at the border are related to cheap hand labor or lower cost hand labor, because the cost, as you said, Ryan, is cheaper here in New Mexico and taxes and et cetera, especially because you have some benefits at the border. But here's the risk. I mean, what are the risks of operating here and building up your compliance program and building up your investigations mechanisms to start extracting, like a surgeon, right? You go extract the data, analyze it, and take wise decisions based on facts. That's one of the key things that we need to consider when we are planning or having this allegation. And just want to get that the first part out there just to make sure that the audience gets it from a very high level. And then the next part, we're going to discuss the details of what we did, for example, in this case of in the investigation. Javier.
Thank you, Fernando. Yeah, really interesting, and I can imagine that you can share with us later today some of your stories of investigations at the border. Well, David, that is the specialist in systems and computers and all that. David, can you explain us a little bit regarding electronic evidence collection? What we should keep in mind when you do an investigation cross-border. So you have information in both sides, and you are dealing with two different sort of authorities and two different sorts of systems and communication and databases. How do you handle that?
Perfect. Thank you, Javier. Well, one of the main things that we need to keep in mind is that we need to catalog and identify any potential source of information. For example, what is in, let's say, currently we're handling an investigation both in the US and Mexico. So we have to identify which custodians are Mexico-based, which custodians are US-based, and for example, things like email, where are they stored? Because you need to keep in mind, what are the local regulations for each country? What can I do, what can't I do, okay? And this is something that's very important. How my IT policies are managing that information, okay? For example, usually, for example, in Mexico, we don't have any explicit regulation that prohibits us from imaging, okay, IT assets. However, if we are covered by an IT policy where each employee signs a consent form saying, hey, this is an IT asset from the company. I'm responsible for any personal information stored in it. However, this belongs to any information stored in this device belongs to the company. That gives me the right and at least some assistance to image, okay? Now, something that's very important, depending on the investigation, once you start collecting evidence, specifically images, okay, alarms will start to go off in a lot of directions. So sometimes you might need to do like a kind of SWOT approach, where you will probably need to have coordinated with different teams to collect evidence at the same time, okay? When you're doing cross-border investigation, that makes it a little bit more complex, because you will have to have a local team in each subsidiary to collect the information before word starts to get out, okay? But the most important thing is, first, identify, okay, what I need to collect, plan, okay, and execute, okay? And always backed up by your policies.
Okay, thank you, David. Really
David, this is Brian. I wanted to ask if you've yet encountered, DOJ has a policy that came out a few months ago relating to what they call ephemeral communications. So the WhatsApp and other platforms, and we all communicate on our phones so much. Have you encountered this ephemeral messaging concept, and have you seen how companies have dealt with it at all? How have you guys dealt with it in the collection and investigation part of when you because we have to deal with this, right? Especially outside the US. WhatsApp is like, everyone communicates with WhatsApp. They use it, in the US people use text messaging, but they don't use it in the same way. I mean, WhatsApp is a common use. Anyway, I wanted to hear how you guys have dealt with that.
Yeah, and Brian, that's a very good question. Usually what happens is, especially with this type of communication, especially in mobile devices, is what happens when users have two devices? Okay, for example, usually I can have my, let's say, business phone provided by the IT company, managed by the IT policies. Okay, and then I have my personal phone. Okay, usually you're able only to collect information that is owned or managed by the company. Okay, unless I get specific consent from the user. Okay, if for example I'm able to collect the IT phone and the phone owned by the business, I'm able to do a full image and collect, for example, FM11, as you said, WhatsApp messages, instant messages, let's say other applications, Instagram, Telegram, etc. Okay, but only for the phone that's owned by the company. Now, if that, but not in all cases, probably the suspicious activity will occur on that phone. Most of the time, it will occur in the phone owned by the person. Okay. Now, what can happen is, first, if the person is backing up his phone on his IT computer, on his business computer, probably some of those backups will be readable by the investigation. Okay. And the other phone only if I get consent from the user. And that's something that's going to be very tricky or very difficult to ask. Okay.
All right, thank you. It reminds me of something we had happen in an investigation a couple of years ago, where we had collected the laptops and phones, etc. We did a subsequent collection though, and we were doing interviews at the same time. And so there were two things that happened. One, there was an email trail that laid out what you would want to hear, right? Oh, we did everything correctly. If you sync up those WhatsApp messages that were occurring literally at the same time, right? You put them on a timeline. Basically, it was ignore my email. I want you to do the bribe. It was unbelievable. But the other part that was fascinating to me was after we started doing interviews, people were messaging about the lawyers, right? And coordinating their story, but also making snarky comments about counsel. So that was a fascinating look at people's impression of me after having to sit through an interview. Sorry about the going off topic, but it's interesting. I mean, people say all kinds of crazy things in their messaging, and if you capture it, it's an important source.
Yeah, because usually it's a coverage. They use it as a cover channel. Okay, and thinking, hey, people are not going to look at this. It also happens a lot with instant messaging within the organization, because sometimes people think, yeah, they're going to monitor my email. Okay, let's not send anything important through my email. But then you see, let's say, Google Chat or the, Teams or Skype chats, and you see, and again, okay, please be aware, we're going to coordinate. Brian, you're going to say this to the investigator. Fernando, you're going to say this. Okay. Again, all in the instant messaging platform, but in the emails, as you said, everything clean, every message should be. So yeah, looking at all those type of information usually gets you the whole picture. Okay.
Thank you, Brian and David. Really, really interesting. Really enjoying that. And well, now I would like to return with Eduardo, and we have a comment here. From Jorge Canavati. He mentioned that the Constellation brand issue, he doesn't think that it's a border issue, but mostly for a miscalculated political decision. Yes, absolutely, but now with the USMCA and the TMEC, we face these challenges now. With the entrance into force of the USMCA, what are Constellation brands looking forward to it, or what are your thoughts about this situation?
Thank you for providing a comment and the question. Yes, it can be the situation can be looked upon on different angles. So yes, in a sense, all the struggle and the entanglement it's a political decision in Mexico, but in my view, it has an impact in U.S.-Mexico border decisions, because the idea of having Mexicali Brewery is to provide with the western part of the United States with Mexican beer. And there's going to be the plan is to have a great amount and of business and beer going through the border, customs, creating these permanent jobs within the company, and investment in Mexicali and all the region. So that kind of forces and inertias are there and affect the border relationship. So I think it can be looked upon in different angles. And the other is with USMCA being in place. I think that there's a kind of a broader scope of options that the company has there. As a company, we're not taking out any of those options at the moment, and the purpose is to have U.S. investment in Mexico, which is more jobs, more production, revitalize and energized economy in Mexico. That's the main idea in the short term. So I think that we would be looking at Chapter 27, which Diego can tell us more about it. But my main focus would be on enforcement. How can these types of investments be protected within the scope of the treaty? And is there going to be in Mexico a better enforcement? I think that for me personally, as compliance officer, I think enforcement is key, because it brings about all these certainty around the any investment or any transaction or business. So that chapter, chapter 27, refers specifically to enforcement actions, and I think now the Mexican government is compelled to strengthen their enforcement actions.
I think Diego, you're in mute.
Yeah, and
Diego.
and that's it. I think that Diego is about to say something.
Yeah, just can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
You put yourself back on mute, Diego. There you go.
Yeah, my image is low, so I cannot see when I actually click it. There we are. Okay. So thank you, Eduardo, for that. And I fully agree that this Constellation brand Mexicali issue, it's closely related to enforcement of Mexican law. But I mean, and I don't want to speak for you or your counsel that you do have the remedies available both under NAFTA and under the USMCA, definitely. Likely under NAFTA, under the 3-year moratorium, so to speak, for claims, which personally I believe NAFTA, it could be better for these types of claims. But that's a personal opinion, of course. But more specifically, dealing with what you were saying about enforcement is how compliance now plays a key issue in developing large infrastructure projects. In this new political landscape, companies like Constellation Brands or an oil company or a large infrastructure company has to take care of every single detail on small permits, large permits, ensuring that the processes and the regulations are fully complied with. And that's always been the case, but now this government, for political reasons, will look into those type of details as an actual excuse to enforce whatever laws, regulations are convenient to them. Of course, they apply some laws when they are convenient to them, but they don't apply some laws where they are not convenient to them. A key example to this is the consultation process, where they didn't follow the law, but they do want to follow the national waters law with respect to the amounts of water that can be extracted for the Mexicali. So yes, I mean, it is a matter of enforcement and politically dispute between, I don't know, the government in Sonora or in Baja California and the federal government. There's some pulling on that we just don't understand what's behind that. But this USMCA will definitely help the Mexican government realize that this type of decisions will have a price tag, a heavy price tag, to be honest. But it's up to the companies to actually enforce their rights. Many companies are always not. They are reluctant to do this because they know it's a direct challenge or direct discussion with the government. And if you have other businesses in Mexico, you have to take that into account. Otherwise, then your Piedras Negras facility also becomes risky. So it's a tough situation. Unfortunately, it's a political situation as well. But there are the legal remedies, both internationally and locally, are there. Mexican courts lately have shown that they are independent. They have actually stopped the policies of the Ministry of Energy, which everybody thought was going to be, they would never actually suspend enforcement. The Supreme Court actually suspended it. I see that as a very positive development for projects such as the Constellation brand. But still, we still have a long way to go on enforcement. I agree with that.
Thank you, Diego.
And no, I was going to say something about not regarding specifically for the politics part, but in terms of the traffic, in terms of the traffic and the volume of transactions and interactions that are occurring between Mexico and the U.S. And I remember I did one experiment. I did, one of my dreams was crossing when I crossed the border walking, and I did. And it was very interesting, the dynamics, and to see people going back and forth with a lot of bulks and big bags of whatever they were bringing. And that interaction is, you can tell people there's a lot of commerce going on in the border. And in that regards, when there's a lot of commerce there's also not too many people that are highly qualified to serve as a vendor, to serve as a provider of different types of services of any company. So going back to what we were building here, talking about the issues of licenses and permits and etc. I just want to go deeper in the story about what we did recently and we identified in this case was this particular vendor was a vendor for logistics. So this vendor didn't even own trucks or buses. He basically was, subcontracting other people that has their own buses and trucks to provide a different type of logistic services to cross the border. They need to be a specific qualifications, specific licenses, all this type of permits. However, this specific vendor allegation was overpriced. Okay, was overpriced. When we were digging into all the communications and all the accounting records and all the interviews, working with external counsel was from the U.S. was basically we identified that there were a lot of transactions that allegedly was higher than other logistics vendors. Okay, so and then also we identified some emails communications where they were specifically asking, what are your permits to cross the border, And the reply was, we have someone else arranging that, okay? So that someone else arranging that increases the level of risk and the focus on, okay, are my third parties getting all the paperwork the way they should be getting it? Is my third party, I'm the only client, and they're transferring that cost to the invoice that I'm paying to them. How I'm monitoring these type of transactions. And on top of that, one of the fleets that this vendor had was belonged to someone that allegedly, due to a due diligence, background search, we identified that was involved in these organized crime organizations. And in the course of the investigation, we got some emails and messages from other people around the area saying, make sure that you don't cut this vendor from your vendor master data. and that friendly reminder was, okay, why that vendor sent that message. So in terms of what specifically are we looking into is we are monitoring our third parties. And then when you do this type of investigation, you have to set your mind. And I really like and love Ryan for many years. And Ryan, as we discussed and laughing out loud, like if you go to Mexico, go being in the border, you're going to stand out because you're big, you're white, and then you may have some probably struggling about the Spanish, but not in Uruguay. That's a funny story. But the point is when are you going to be able to conduct this investigation in a way that doesn't cause any big impact in the area? Because everybody knows there. Everybody knows everybody. You have to make sure that everybody knows everybody. Even if you cross the border, just crossing the border, everybody knows everybody. So those are the things that you need to be very cautious and be very strategic to how are you planning your investigation. The part of going there to the border, extract information, analyze it, and now with the pandemic, that's where you need to have. And Brian and Diego and David will agree with me, and Javier as well, and everybody here, is you need to be like a SWAT team. Go in there with a parachute, do what you need to do, and get out of there. Not only because of security now, because of the pandemic, but I want to keep elaborating a little bit more about the story, and then I will tell you at the end what was the conclusion. But I think, Javier, you have other further questions from the audience and things that you have been taking notes as well.
Well, I would like to ask Brian and you, Fernando, as well, or anyone who wants to enter. Now that you are saying that everybody knows everybody and everybody knows what is happening, what will happen if someone that is doing business cross-border knows something, but they doesn't do something? They just keep quiet. Let's see what happens. Brian, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more on this.
Sure, I can start. It's a common scenario, right? I mean, people do not want to blow the whistle on really anything, right? You've got your own personal concerns. I don't want to draw attention to myself. This seems to be, everything's going fine. Why would I disrupt it? But I kind of come back to policies again. The company should have a policy that encourages people to speak up, because that defends the company. And if people speak up, because the folks on the front line, the folks that are dealing with an agent, are the only people who are really going to know, or are the people who are going to know best what's going on. I was going to say Constellation has a big advantage having Eduardo in country, because a lot of American companies, they don't have folks in Mexico who understand what the problems are, anticipate them, and are able to remediate them. Actually, just having someone like Eduardo in country could put employees at ease, right? Give them an avenue to come and report something. But it's also conduct that he will recognize. If someone were to come into his office and say, look, I observed this, I don't know if it's an issue, his experience level and ability to connect with the employee, I think serve as a huge advantage. And it is more difficult for especially US companies who want to take advantage of the opportunity of doing business in Mexico, but don't have the infrastructure in place, and frankly don't understand what they're going to encounter just at the border, much less once you get across the border. There are other issues you have to deal with. But I think that companies best deal with this by trying to encourage their employees to come forward. No retaliation, We take compliance seriously, because otherwise you can't coax the information out of them. And the other end of the spectrum from a risk perspective, when that investigation starts, and it will, that employee risks being seen as being involved in the problem or covering up the problem. If they had information that they could have come forward with and they didn't, the risk to them is, if I come and investigate and those are the facts, the conclusion I might draw is this employee was involved. Oh, you knew this, why didn't you come forward? The story may be truthful. I just didn't want to do that. It may also be, that's my story today, but yesterday I was involved in it. So.
And building on top of that, and going back to the third parties and being involved, one of the things that came for another issue at the border, I remember being in one of the toughest places that I have been is next to McAllen, which is Reynosa, right? And I remember that part where the issue was that, as you know, Diego can go deeper from a regulatory perspective. All the customs licenses and permits belong to a person, not to the company, right? So I think those are the good things that good things that the people from the US should know, right? When you're doing a due diligence, don't look for the company, because the company doesn't own the license of the custom agent. It's a person that sometimes they lease that license to other people. So Diego can go deeper in that. However, in this particular aspect, Ryan, what you are saying is that I remember that we were conducting the interviews with the outside counsel in McAllen, and the only one we did in Reynosa. And the person that we did that was the last interview that we did there. The way how she started, I remember. That, and how you doing? And asked, and she said, yesterday there was the guy from the taco in the corner of my house died in a car accident. Like, what do you mean? Yeah, there was a police military chasing, and they crashed, and the poor family sadly died on that accident. But she was saying like a normal day. Today's sunny and this. It's very hot outside. So she was kind of getting used to this type of environment where they operate, and in that regards, she came out in a very natural way, saying, I know the person who owns the license and who are leasing it. And I know how they are transacting this type of issues and going through the borders and going through some potentially bribing, etc. Because there were one of the allegations here that they were bribing these government officials through this custom agent, because most of their merchandise, they were in the red channel. And as you know, in the border you have green and red, and when you're red, you are getting checked or revised and all the details. And in the Mexican border, in the Mexican side, and also sometimes in the US side, you get to this type of interactions and issues. And this was all through this custom agent, but the custom agent, again, the issue here is, and then Diego and Brian can go deeper on this, and you have also experience, Eduardo, is that in the custom agent, how you can do the due diligence and go in from a legal perspective, from an FCPA perspective, how you can link that specific lease of that license to the specific company that's operating as your custom agent. You know what I mean? Because for us, it was just, we identified with the team, with the IT forensics team, there were some irregularities and issues and discussions. We identified the invoices, we identified the overprices, we look into the import liquidations and forms. But then I think it will be good from a Mexico and US side, how do you link that specific bribe if the license and the permit doesn't belong to the company, it belongs to someone else and is leased. I think I want to throw that conversation to you guys, because I think from a US and Mexico angle, it will be important for our audience to learn and know, right? I know, Diego, you want to start? You're in mute again. No. There you go. No. Maybe you want to start, Ryan, till Diego figures out.
Always happen with technology. Well, Brian?
Diego, can you unmute? I was going to let Diego handle it. You're still muted. There you go.
No, you go back. No.
So
go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. So from my perspective, you raised two issues. One is if an agent like that, which is very common if we're talking about customs agents, they have the license and they've leased it to somebody else. It just takes work trying to identify that. The first thing that comes to mind, your interview ended with, oh yeah, we know how this works with this particular agent, this license holder. If something happened and were published and you did due diligence, maybe you didn't catch that the first time around, but it demonstrates how important monitoring is, because that might come up again. And so just because you've had an agent for 10 years, you still have to keep track of them and monitor them and update that information routinely. But as far as making the link on the US side, making the linkage between we've got a license holder who's probably engaged in some illegal activity, and we've got the leaseholder of the license who's also using it, and you can't tell the difference. It's just a bit of detective work from my perspective, but it demonstrates how important the due diligence is and the monitoring of the due diligence. So there are a lot of companies, and in my experience, that okay, we did what we needed to do, the end, right? And we hired the agent, the end. That's not how compliance works in the modern enforcement setting. The modern enforcement setting, they're still going to ask you why. How did this happen? Something went wrong. What did you do? So.
Yeah, and thank you, Brian. Sorry, my mute button's not working properly. But to follow that up, I think, Fernando, also the contracts with your agents are very important. For example, usually for this type of customs agents, usually the customs agent will sell you whatever engagement letter, a very simple document that really doesn't contain any specific provisions that could allow you to protect regarding anti-corruption and audits. So what you want to do is have a nice or a new contract that actually contemplates audit rights to the company, so that you can go in and review whatever documents are in possession of the customs agent. That's very important. So that you have a contractual right to access those documents. They are contractually obligated to produce all of those documents. I think that would be a first a big ticket item regarding contracts that you use with customs agents. And of course, the due diligence part. Prior to engaging them, you have to, I wish that there was a simple solution to that, but doing a proper due diligence pretty much resolves much of these issues, so that you don't end up in a contractual dispute or in a legal dispute with the government regarding your involvement in corruption. Understanding what the role of the agent is as well, it's very important. For example, customs agents would typically tell you as clients that it's typical in Mexico to pay in cash whatever service, which in the Mexican government, nothing is paid in cash lawfully. You have to actually go to a bank, use a pre-approved form by the Mexican government. So all of those things together help you mitigate those risks. But there is no one simple answer other than actually doing the due diligence, using the proper contracts, being properly advised as well under Mexican law and regulation. I think that would be the biggest recommendation.
Yeah, and one of the best in class practices that I've seen in bigger companies is that having an anti-corruption policy performing due diligence, a thorough due diligence with a WASP questionnaire, asking for subcontractors. Maybe if there's in this case of custom agents, maybe a specific question regarding leasing the custom agent's license. Digging out, asking the tough questions. That's the job of compliance officers. And then in the end, the monitoring aspect is key. There can be 3 months monitoring for vendors, 6 months monitoring, for example, and then a renewal of the due diligence. Vendors should go through a complete renewal every 3 to 5 years. That's the best in class criteria. And in the end, they should have these anti-corruption clause or anti-corruption certification signed. And maybe for custom agents, they should include this type of provision, of clause regarding leasing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Eduardo, I agree, and I probably omitted to say one important item under Mexican law is that compliance programs, if duly implemented, are mitigators for purposes of sanctions, right? So having a proper compliance program within the company that's actually well known to employees, not only a mere document that it's just stored somewhere in the computer frame, but actual seminaries to the people, training materials, etc. That would act as a big mitigant for purposes of Mexican law, and I believe, Brian, that for purposes of U.S. law, that would be the case as well.
Yeah, I saw there's a question that's come up that I was going to address about advice you'd give companies living or interacting across borders to better control their compliance policy and their employees to prevent or investigate some form of non-compliance. And to me, this sort of follows on the compliance program discussion that we're having. You know, one of the tools is training. I mean, I'm a big believer, and by the way, my belief comes from the U.S. government's guidance, which is evolving over time. But I'm a big believer in pushing the compliance function out into the business, right? The problems are sometimes caused by the idea that as a business development person or a salesperson, oh, I don't have that responsibility. Compliance isn't my problem. Mm-hmm. My job is sales, and so that can create issues in some, sometimes non-compliance. So we've got to communicate to the business. It's really everybody's responsibility. And so that comes through training on the policies, that comes through training on, the specific issues that people might encounter at the border, or working in whatever your company is, whatever the industry is. There are obviously specifics that come up. So training people, but also making them accountable, which is harder than it seems. But, and if your annual review process takes into account whether people are complying with policies or not, that's a great tool. There's a there's a kind of a bell curve on compliance, and out here on the end, there are always people that are going to do whatever they want to do. Sometimes it's intentional. I'm not going to comply. I'm a bad apple. We're going to pay bribes because I'm successful. But just inside of that, there are people who don't do it because they don't think they have to, right? But if you incentivize that behavior, it's carrot and stick, right? Try to give them a carrot. If they don't like it, beat them with a stick. But make them accountable if possible, and build it into the policy, build it into the review process, train with that idea in mind. Those are my thoughts on that question.
And can I add up from a forensic standpoint of view and the books and records? The thing is that here in anywhere in the world, you don't have an account or a general ledger account that says bribes paid or bribing or whatever you want to do in Spanish, mordida, right? Or in Mexican Spanish, or coimas. It is all over the place. So in terms of having the training, the appropriate training, and also identifying the risks, because it will be easier for forensic investigators like us to work with law firms Is it will be easier if we have already mapped out the risks, right, Ryan and Diego and Eduardo, that you already, oh, this was a risk and it's already occurred, and now we need to go to investigate. That is the one that we want to have all the time, but it never happens, right? Because you get hit by anywhere, anyhow, and you need to investigate. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that all my books and records and everything is linked. And especially, I think David would like to comment on the IT infrastructure, because there's a lot of issues on the data in order to identify what will be the right data. And right now, even though most of the companies around the world are moving to a cloud-based solution, not all of them have it. And there's legacy systems as well. There are different data. And I believe that from a standpoint of view, that you have the right policies, but also the right controls and the right indexes or key indicators that will tell you some potential red flags. So that's how you prevent investigating. And when it happens, I'm going to link and jump into the next question, if you allow me, for just 2 or 3 minutes. Is how to mitigate the risk derived from the presence of organized crime between our borders when an internal investigation is going to be carried out. That's a fantastic question, and the best answer to this is you need to have some sort of SWAT team, a strategic committee that will address that carefully, which will include compliance, which will include security. I don't know if you have security, the team there, which will include forensics investigators or investigators in general, which will include a law firm, external counsel, inside counsel, and different areas that you may have in your company that will help you to be strategic. What it means to be strategic, it means that you need to understand where it's going to be the pain, who is the circle that you're going to maybe intrude or attack, and then how you're going to address that particular issue to get the information the right way. Let me tell you something. When we have started investigations where we do not know that there's organized crime behind it, we just make a hard stop and escalate that to a level where people in the area needs to know which are the key stakeholders, and you need to ask for help. Militaries, cross-border police, or whatever is the issue, you need to step up and start asking with the right channels, with the right communication, with the right legal approach based on whatever is the legal framework that you are using. So I think that putting that together as a very strategic committee with different angles, you need to start working around it and make it more effective, because you need to make sure that your strategy for the investigation, it needs to be effective. Okay, it needs to be effective. And remember, when you're going to start doing investigations, whatever it is, specifically at the border that we're discussing right now, you only have one chance to go there. And you may agree with me, Eduardo and Brian and everybody here. You make one chance to get there, extract information, get access to the people you need to ask, because once you start doing an investigation or whatever type of assessment you want to call it, because depending on the maturity of the level, you can call it audit, you can call it an assessment, whatever, or you can even call it a compliance investigation openly. And then you will need to have that specific mindset where you address the issue as it goes and make a strategic decision as it goes. But from my team perspective, just giving a chance of David in terms of organized crimes and the assets that you need to take care of, it's something that is important, right?
Yeah. Okay, perfect. As Fernando mentioned, well, yeah, policies are bedrock, our foundation, okay, for compliance, and you always have to keep in mind also the IT side, okay, because as business nowadays rely heavily on technology, and we need to have that base covered. We need to have, for example, going forward from correct use of IT assets, including information security, because once you start defining all those things, all those policies, it helps people know what are the boundaries, what is the accepted behavior and what is not. And once you have those rules in place, it's easier to say, hey, you're not compliant, this might have an impact. This could have a sanction. This could have a penalty on you, and helps you reinforce. And also gives you the basis for the other side of the coin. That's when something happens, what is your support to gather and use that information? Okay. Once you have those policies defined, you at any time you can say, hey, yeah, we did an investigation, we reviewed your emails, and if the user complains, hey, why do you review emails? Okay, this is an IT policy. All information that's moving through the company, through our assets, is subject to review. And this includes, for example, what we discussed earlier. If you're using an IT phone, okay, I'm able to review and monitor your communications on that device, okay? And that gives me the evidence for the investigations. Regarding, there's something that someone mentioned again. Well, what should I have from the cybersecurity side in mind when I'm working cross borders? Well, this is something interesting. In IT, there's no borders. Okay, my border is virtual. Okay, so I need to have good information security, cybersecurity controls all over my network. Okay, because it doesn't matter if I'm in Mexico, I'm in US, or I'm in Bangkok or whatever. Okay, my IT assets are exposed, especially now that we're working through this pandemic. Okay, where working at home has become the new normal. Okay, I also now have to expand that virtual border to my users' homes. Okay, so what controls I'm putting in place, how I'm monitoring those assets that are now outside my organization to make sure they're complying with my policies. How can I make sure that those computers sitting at home are not being subject to A, misuse, or B, being exposed to potential risks? Okay, right now, for example, cyber ransom, cyber attacks are becoming more commonplace because those computers at home are less protected. So at any point, one of those computers could be hacked, could be exposed to a vulnerability that might open a backdoor into my company. So yeah, those are things that I need to be aware. And no, my border right now is everywhere. Okay, especially from the IT side. Okay.
Thank you, David. And we have another question from the audience, and I think Diego will be the right one, and also Eduardo, the right one to respond this. Regarding the independence or how the judicial system works in Mexico, what the investor should expect from the judicial power. They are working following politics, or they are following the rule of law?
You want to go first then, Diego? There you go.
Yeah.
We hear you, Diego.
Okay.
No, we don't hear you now.
Why don't we start? Yeah.
Okay.
Stay there. Don't touch.
Sorry, the feature is too slow, so when I click, it doesn't change. So I don't know where I'm standing. Sorry. Okay. So I was like I was saying in Eduardo's first intervention, there have been some recent precedents on the independence of the judiciary that on a personal level were pretty surprising. I was more of the idea that the independence of the judiciary was going to be subjected to the executive power from the get-go. As you may recall, the president or the chairman of the Supreme Court from the first day of AMLO's office pretty much sided with him, saying that the Supreme Court was spending too much money and they were not actually doing what they were supposed to do, whatever. So the legal community thought that that was the end of the independence of the judiciary. However, recent decisions, specifically on energy policy that have been very controversial lately, have demonstrated otherwise. Both federal courts and the Supreme Court have actually suspended the enforcement of politically flags of the what we call the 4T, the fourth transformation, and they have gone directly against the president's wishes. This is very encouraging. There are questions, however, like in a lot of those cases, whether that independence will be upheld. It becomes a more tricky scenario when political reasons are behind the decision, such as in the Mexicali case, the airport case, etc. But I think the judiciary, based on the facts, they have actually shown that they will take independent decisions. They will uphold the Constitution and, of course, the international treaties. So I am more positive than I used to be a couple of months, to be honest, a couple of months ago.
Thank you, Diego. Eduardo, I don't know if you want to mention something about this.
No, I think Diego covered it up, covered everything, and my sense is also encouraging, taking his comment, coming from an expert, and also combining it with the fact that the USMCA has this provision of enforcement that the state parties should provide and do any effort to strengthen their enforcement. So that would be pushing forward and leveling up judicial system here in Mexico, I think, hopefully.
Thank you, Eduardo. Well, we have still a couple of minutes to go. We have another couple of questions from the audience here. Let's see. We have another one from the IT perspective. What would be the best practice to have on both sides? If on IT, if you should have the same systems in both sides, or it could work fine if you have two different systems in each side of the country.
Okay. Yeah, usually the simpler, or let's say the more homogeneous your IT infrastructure is, the better. Okay, because you wouldn't have to worry about having different infrastructures or different interfaces to convert from one system to the other. Okay, and usually it's easier to have, let's say, one central system for, depending on the size of your organization. However, that's another way that it usually begins. Sometimes you start with one system. When you start operations, let's say in the US, you start working with one simple system. When you start operations, let's say in Mexico, then you start working with another one, and things start growing in different ways. I'm not going to say it's bad. It can be manageable, okay? But you need to have controls around it, okay? Again, if you move to a central system, it's better on the long run, because it'll be easier to manage from the IT side. You will have less headaches on managing interfaces and converting systems from one side to the other, okay? But you have to understand what are the pros and the cons, okay? You see, doing that migration probably will be expensive. It'll probably require time, because you will have to decide what will be the best system, what will be the cost, the licensing, etc., and all there's a data formation, implementation, okay, and it can be a long process, okay, but you will have benefits on the end, okay. So it's something you will have to wait. Okay, what I have now, what are my pros, what are my cons, what are my difficulties, what are my headaches from this, versus what are the costs of migrating, what will be the benefits I have, okay, and how much time and resources I will have to invest to do it, okay.
Thank you, David. What a wonderful morning we are having here. I'm really enjoying this. We have covered issues from the Constellation Brands matters in Mexicali, the USMCA, IT perspective, rule of law, investment investigations. Wow, what a that's a lot of information to digest. And in the interest of time, I would like to thank to all of the participants, thank to all the assistants, and I would like to open the microphone to anyone other of my panelists if they want to give a closing remark or a final remark.
You want to start? Maybe go Eduardo, Brian,
Okay.
Diego, Fernando, and David, and that's how we go.
That's a good idea. Go ahead, Eduardo.
Yeah, thank you. I think that this panel was great. The discussion was very abundant with ideas and around investigations, compliance programs, the Constellation brands in Mexicali, and we can have discussion afterwards if you like. I'm open to it, and I think that my takeaway would be that something that Fernando mentioned, that investigations, once they occur, feed the compliance program. Once an investigation is made, there are some resolutions, and there are things that are seen that the company is not seeing or the organization is not looking at, and that gives the opportunity for the compliance program to evolve and to continue growing. And let us remember one of the federal sentencing guidelines provisions and compliance programs. The compliance program should not become stale. It should be evolving and should be effective. So I think that everything that was discussed here can help and helps a compliance program to become effective. Very happy and very honored to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eduardo. And yes, I think I would reiterate more on the Mexican side of the issues. Our recommendation here is that clients take an interest, or companies take an interest into their operations on the side of the border. I think it's very important that they retain proper advice. If they cannot provide it in-house, that they retain proper advice to understand the regulation behind their transactions at the border. This always results in actually understanding whether something is being conducted properly or not. It's very hard to make a judgment to see whether the customs agent is acting properly if the company itself is not aware of what properly means under Mexican laws and regulations. So we would insist on understanding and getting a full grasp on Mexican laws and regulations at the border, which can be, I wouldn't say complex, but can be cumbersome. There's a lot of changes. They're mutating very often. So having a proper compliance and follow-up program on that, I think it's key to avoiding these type of risks. And especially now that this government, the flag of this government allegedly is to enforce anti-corruption laws and regulations, and they want to combat bribery, etc. Companies should be aware that the risk of non-compliance or breaching anti-corruption laws will be increased in the next couple of years. So I was very honored to participate. Thank you, Javier, and to the association. It was a really great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego.
Good summaries. I agree. Thanks for having me. Fernando?
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, from an IT side, I'd say that one of the important things, as I mentioned, is that we don't have any borders. Okay, so we need to work a lot on defending and protecting our whole infrastructure, especially right now, as I mentioned, during the pandemic, how I can help my users, my endpoints to be better protected, more secure. Okay, and reinforcing it through our IT policies that will help also the compliance program. I believe that's the biggest takeaway I hope you leave with. Okay, so, and be safe. Okay.
Thank you, David.
And from my standpoint, thank you for organizing this, Javier. Thank you for having us, Eduardo, Brian, Diego, David. A pleasure always chatting with you. And to the audience, I will just give you 3 tips. Not all your vendors are, even though you have a due diligence program, not all the vendors will be the best vendors you could have, and there could be some issues with them in terms of fraud, in terms of corruption, in terms of potentially money laundering and organized crime. The other point here is make sure when you do an investigation, make sure that you understand your landscape and your risk around it. Make sure who you're dealing with and be able to ask for help and do a very SWAT team and put together a SWAT team that will help you to carry out this in the way effective. And then the other point here is how much you're willing to invest or spend in an investigation. I think most of the companies at the border or anywhere in the world, they don't have specific budgets for conducting internal investigations. It comes as it goes. It damages your reputation, and you should do something about it. So, and then you need to put together the best team to do it. So have that in mind, and make sure that you make the right decisions in terms of investigations. Is not as simple as it looks. And thank you so much for being with us. And Javier, you're the last one to close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fernando. And again, thank you for your collaboration with the Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos San Antonio chapter. Thank you to Denton's. Thank you to F&C Consulting Group. Thank you to Constellation Brands. All of the assistants will receive soon a link where you will find this webinar on the YouTube platform. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your cooperation, and we really look forward looking you on our further events. Well, with this, in the interest of time, we took some minutes more, but thank you. And again, I really enjoyed this conversation. Have a good day.
Be safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.